Is Artemis Fowl still good? This is a book I read when I was a kid, and I have just finished rereading it with my 8-year-old son. So I'm going to tell you what my reaction has been after reading it for the first time in nearly 20 years, what my son's reaction was, and what I think is the part that held up the best after this nearly 2-decade gap. Hi, I'm Craig, and welcome to Dads Who Read, where we're working together to build better relationships with our children and also to improve ourselves. I reread Artemis Fowl with my son because this was a book I remember really enjoying as a kid. I believe I must have been 12. Well, I couldn't have been 12 because I just actually checked out the publication date and it says 2001. So I was, I think, 13. Now that I'm remembering it, I remember the middle school where I got it, so I would have been 13, and I got it at a book fair, which actually explains this. It says at the back here that this edition is only available for distribution through the school market, and it was only $4. Like, that is amazing. It was only $4. So most copies that are out today don't look like this. I don't know if this was the first edition type look on it or what. But the reason why I was really motivated to reread this was knowing that there was the movie coming out and seeing some of the hype about the movie. Now I don't know if it's being delayed. I'm filming this at a time where I'm not sure if it's going to be delayed. I thought, well, it's time to revisit that book. Let's read it with my son. It seems like something he would enjoy. He's 8 years old. I was older when I read it, but it seemed like, hey, this is going to hit those things that he liked. I was trying to remember why I liked it. And I even texted my brother, who also really liked this book as a kid. And he and I agreed that the reason why we were really interested in it was that it was this idea of this boy who was kind of a genius, but and had some really cool tech, just this high-tech ideas. And he was able to outsmart the fairies, as fairies the general term for them, right? Fairies, leprechaun, whatever it is. He was able to outsmart them using his intellect and his technology. So I was excited to jump right back into it with my son. So my thoughts on this book is that I'm worried about saying this because I know there's a dedicated fan base, and I know surrounding the movie there's been lots of fans out there defending this book with their lives, but actually wasn't that impressed this time around. It was actually, as I was going back and rereading it, I was like, man, why did I think this was such a cool book? I can tell you one reason why maybe it didn't age as well, and that is because the technology just doesn't seem that cool anymore. A lot of that technology is actually pretty commonplace. We've got like tiny cameras to take pictures of the fairy book, the golden book. They had computing power. They had all these things that actually don't age that well. Today, so many of the stuff is already available. It actually seems archaic. It's like a kid reading it today. I mean, this wasn't my son's reaction, but I can imagine being like, yeah, like, why is he using that? Why doesn't he just use a smartphone or something like that, right? Like, there is the technology, amazingly, just has already come to pass. And so it's weird that that's what makes this book feel dated, is that it felt really high tech at the time, and yet today it actually feels like it's behind the times. So that's one of the parts that did not age very well. Another thing that I think, this isn't about aging, this is just my experience as a reader as I've read more. I feel like the world building wasn't that amazing, at least in this first book. I wasn't in, like, what's the right word? It's not like I really felt like, oh yeah, I want to be in this world. I feel like there are fairies around me. Like, the first time you read Harry Potter, Sorcerer's Stone, you're in there, you want to go to Hogwarts, you want to be in that world. When you read so many of these books, it just brings you in. When you read Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, like, that changes the way you're thinking about these powers. Like, you're imagining using these powers around you, right? And there's just nothing in Artemis Fowl that really roped me in, that made me feel like, oh, I am in this world and I wish that this was real. So that was a part of the world building and just kind of the fantasy aspect that didn't really stick with me. It wasn't something that I felt like yeah, I need to get more of this. I was actually really surprised. Like, I knew that there were at least 3 books, but then to go out and see how many of these books there are, I mean, there's at least 7, right? I think it's more than that. I was surprised that it was able to go for that long. That tells me that the first book, with everything that was going on, you know, this is kind of like the first attempt, and as the books go on, the world building gets better and the excitement gets better. And so maybe if we were to keep reading this series, we'd be more excited about what's going on and being a part of that world. But I just didn't feel like it after this first book. Another struggle here is the pacing. Oftentimes, like, how long do you go? You go pretty long after... So yeah, so I'm just looking it up right now, and in this version of the book, you finish with the first part of Artemis' story at page 30, and then you get introduced to Holly on that next page, and you just stick with Holly for another 32 pages in this book. Like, it just felt like, oh, we're going to take this part, we're going to introduce you to this character, and then we're going to go for a really long time on this character. And I feel like it should have been interwoven a little bit more. It would have created more tension, where it would have been involved in both of them, wondering when are they going to meet. Instead, it was just, it went on a really long time with this story about Holly when we had just been introduced to Artemis and just been introduced to the things that he was doing. And so I felt like that was strange. Then also, like, halfway through the book is when you first get introduced to Mulch Diggums, and that really interrupts the pacing of the book again. And then another big weakness with this book in the terms of pacing, it's 9 chapters. And this version of the book is 275 pages about. 9 chapters over 275 pages. Each chapter is fairly big. It makes it more difficult to read with a kid because the chapters get so long. Chapters are natural breaking points for reading with my son. And so to just have these chapters go on forever, oftentimes I would have to stop and multiple times in between chapters to make sure we had enough time to get through what we need to that night. And then, you know, chapters are important for building up suspense and building up that page-turning aspect, right? You build up the tension, you have some sort of payoff, and then the chapter ends with this almost cliffhanger, and you want to keep going. But a lot of times, like this book, since it's only 9 chapters over 275 pages, you don't get that pacing, you don't feel that compulsion to keep going. So I think those are my major complaints, is that the technology just doesn't really hold up, and the fantasy world building aspect of it didn't really capture my imagination, and then the pacing was really difficult. So I don't think that this held up as well. My son liked it. I don't think he was captured by the technology, because again, like, that technology isn't that special today. I don't think he was captured by the world building. It's not something where he's, you know, made believe that he's in that world since then. I think that's kind of a strange indicator that he wasn't totally captured by this, where he's not doing his own make-believe play. And then one thing I mentioned, Mulch Diggums. He did love Mulch Diggums, so that was his favorite part of the book. And it's, you know, in a way that you would expect an 8-year-old boy. When Mulch is digging underground, he consumes dirt and then expels it. And he just always thought those jokes were funny. Like, in a conflict, Mulch expels all the dirt, basically farting, you know, pooping on the enemy, and my son just died laughing. But that's what you expect out of an 8-year-old when you're making potty jokes. So my son really liked that part. What part do I think held up the best after all of these years? Well, you can see it on this cover. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's the code. And the code is at the bottom and runs along the bottom of the book. That was really fun. This is the part actually that I remember the most as a kid, was going through and deciphering this code. And then to have that chance to do that with my son this time around, he really enjoyed going through and picking through this code. It was actually a fun experience. It was during a break where I had time to sit down with him and do this, and we had a really good bonding experience over that. And so when we're talking about creating those meaningful relationships with your children, that is one aspect that this book offers, is that opportunity to do a little bit more, to go beyond the book. It's not just you read this and you finish. You have that opportunity to go through and crack this code. And so I think that's a really fun aspect of this book. I don't know if I should keep going. Should I keep going? Should I read more of the series with my son? Does it get better? Is there hope? I don't know. I don't know anything about the rest of the series. So if you could let me know in the comments below, I'd really appreciate it. You should also check out some other videos I'm doing on reading books from my childhood with my son, or also other tips on reading for dads. Please subscribe, and we will see you the next time on Dads Who Read.